Johnson's Shakespeare was virulently attacked by Mr. William Kenrick, who obtained the degrees of LL.D. from a Scotch university, and wrote for the booksellers in a great variety of branches. Though he certainly was not without considerable merit, he wrote with so little regard to decency and principles and decorum, and so hasty a manner, that his reputation was neither extensive nor lasting. I remember one evening, when some of his works were mentioned, Dr. Goldsmith said he had never heard of them, upon which Dr. Johnson observed, "Sir, he is one of the many who have made themselves public without making themselves known." A young student at Oxford, of the name of Barclay, wrote an answer to Kenrick's review of Johnson's Shakespeare. Johnson was at first angry that Kenrick's attack should have the credit of an answer, but afterwards, considering the young man's good intentions, he kindly noticed him, and probably would have done more had not the young man died. In his preface to Shakespeare, Johnson treated Voltaire very contemptuously, observing upon some of his remarks, quote, "These are the petty criticisms of petty wits," unquote. Voltaire, in revenge, made an attack upon Johnson in one of his numerous literary sallies which I remember to have read. But there being no general index to his voluminous works, I have searched for it in vain, and therefore cannot quote it. Voltaire was an antagonist with whom I thought Johnson should not disdain to contend. I pressed him to answer. He said he perhaps might, but he never did. Mr. Burney, having occasion to write to Johnson for some receipt for subscriptions to his Shakespeare, which Johnson had omitted to deliver when the money was paid, he availed himself of that opportunity of thanking Johnson for a great pleasure which he had received from the perusal of his preface to Shakespeare, which, although it excited much clamor against him at first, is now just ranked among the most excellent of his writings. To this letter Johnson returned the following answer. To Charles Burney, Esquire, in Poland Street. Sir, I am sorry for your kindness to me has brought upon you so much trouble, though you have taken care to abate that sorrow by the pleasure which I receive from your approbation. I defend my criticism in the same manner with you. We must confess the faults of our favorite, to gain credit to our praise of his excellence. He that claims, either in himself or for another, that honors of perfection, will surely endure the reputation which he designs to assist. Be pleased to make my compliments to your family. I am, sir, your most obliged and most humble servant, October 16, 1765, Sam Johnson. From one of his journals, I transcribe what follows. Quote, At church, October 65. To avoid all singularity, Bonaventura. He was probably proposing to himself the model of the excellent person, Bonaventura, who had, for his piety, was named the Seraphic Doctor. Again from this journal. To come in before service and compose my mind by meditation or by reading some portions of Scripture. Teddy. If I can hear the sermon to attend it, unless attention be more troublesome than useful. To consider the act of prayer as a reposal of myself upon God and resignation of all into his holy hand. End quote. To consider in 1764 and 1765, it should seem that Dr. Johnson was so busily employed with his edition of Shakespeare as to have had little leisure for any other literary exertion, or indeed even for private correspondence. He did not favor me with a single letter for more than 2 fucking years. Well, Boswell doesn't say that, he just says 2 years. For which it will appear that he afterwards apologized. He was, however, at all times ready to give assistance to his friends and others in revising their works and in writing for them or greatly improving their dedications. Oh, I should get into this dedication business. That's like half of what Johnson did. In that courtly species of composition, no man excelled Dr. Johnson. Though the loftiness of his mind prevented him from ever dedicating in his own person, he wrote a very great number of dedications for others. Some of these, the persons who were favored with them are unwilling should be mentioned, from a too anxious apprehension, as I think, that they might be suspected of having received larger assistance. And some, after all the diligence I have bestowed, have escaped my inquiries. Johnson told me, a great many years ago, he believed he had dedicated to all the royal family round, and it was indifferent to him what was the subject of the work dedicated, provided it were innocent. He once dedicated some music for the German flute to Edward, Duke of York. In writing dedications for others, he considered himself as by no means speaking his own sentiments. Notwithstanding his long silence, I never omitted to write to him when I had anything worthy of communicating. I generally kept copies of my letters to him, that I might have a full view of our correspondence and never be at a loss to understand any reference in his letters, which never came. Sorry, that's me again. He kept the greater part of mine very carefully, and a short time before his death was attentive enough to seal them up in bundles and order them to be delivered to me, which was accordingly done. Well, that's sweet. Amongst them I found one of which I had not made a copy, and which I owned I read with pleasure at the distance of almost 20 years. It is dated November 1765 at the palace of Pascal Paoli in Court, the capital of Corsica, and is full of generous enthusiasm. After giving a sketch of what I had seen and heard in that island, it proceeded thus, quoting myself, I dare to call this a spiritual tour. I dare to challenge your approbation. End quote. This letter produced the following answer, which I found on my arrival at Paris. A Mr. Boswell, Chez Mr. Waters, Banquier à Paris. Dear Sir, apologies are seldom of any use. We will delay till your arrival the reasons, good or bad, which have made me such a sparing and ungrateful correspondent. Be assured for the present that nothing has lessened either the esteem or love which I dismissed you at Harwich. Both have been increased by all that I have been told of you by yourself or by others. And when you return, you will return to an unaltered and, I hope, unalterable friend. All that you have to fear from me is the vexation of disappointing me. No man loves to frustrate expectations which have been formed in his favor, and the pleasure which I promise myself from your journals and remarks is so great that perhaps no degree of attention or discernment will be sufficient to afford it. Come home, however, and take your chance. I long to see you and to hear you, and hope we shall not be so long separated again. Come home and expect such a welcome as is due to him who a wise and noble curiosity has led, where perhaps no native of this country ever was before. I have no news to tell you that can deserve your notice, nor will I willingly lessen the pleasure that any novelty may give you of your return. I am afraid we shall find it difficult to keep amongst us a mind which has been so long feasted with variety. But let us try what esteem and kindness can effect. As your father's liberality has indulged you with so long a ramble, I doubt not but you will think his sickness, or even his desire to see you, a sufficient reason for hastening your return. The longer we live and the more we think, the higher value we learn to put on the friendship and tenderness of parents and of friends. Parents we can have not but once, and he promises himself too much, who enters life with the expectation of finding many friends. Upon some motive, I hope that you will be here soon, and am willing to think that it will be an inducement to you to return, that it is sincerely desired by, dear sir, your affectionate, humble servant, Sam Johnson. Johnson's Court, Fleet Street, January 14th, 1766. I returned to London in February and found Dr. Johnson in a good house in Johnson's Court, Fleet Street, in which he had accommodated Miss Williams with an apartment on the ground floor, while Mr. Levitt occupied his post in the garret. His faithful Francis was still attending upon him. He received me with much kindness. The fragments of our conversation, which I have preserved, are these. I told him that Voltaire, in a conversation with me, had distinguished Pope and Dryden thus. Pope drives a handsome chariot with a couple of neat, trim nags, Dryden a coach, and 6 stately horses. Johnson answered, Why, sir, the truth is that they both drive coaches and 6, but Dryden's horses are either galloping or stumbling. Pope's go on at a steady, even trot. It is remarkable that Mr. Gray has employed somewhat the same image to characterize Dryden. He indeed furnishes his car with but 2 horses, but they are of ethereal race. Johnson said of Goldsmith's Traveller, which had been published in my absence, There has not been so fine a poem since Pope's time. And here it is proper to settle with authentic precision what has long floated in public report as to Johnson's being himself the author of a considerable part of that poem. Much, no doubt, both of the sentiments and expression were derived from conversation with him, and it was certainly submitted to his friendly revision. But in the year 1783, he, at my request, marked with a pencil the lines which he had furnished, which are only line 420th, 420 man, to stop too fearful and too faint to go. And the concluding 10 lines, except the last couplet but one, which I distinguish by the italic character. Oops, I fucked up that last footnote, but I'll get to that in a second. Here's the part for this part, though. How small of all that human heart endure, the part which kings or laws can cause or cure, still out to ourselves in every place consigned, our own felicity we make or find, with secret course, which no loud storms annoy, glides the smooth current of domestic joy. These next 2 lines are in italics. The lifted axe, the agonizing wheel, Luke's iron crown, and Damien's bed of steel. Italics are over. To men remote from power, but rarely known, leave reason, faith, and conscience all our own. I'm going to pause and go back to the previous page because I was reading a footnote about how Mr. Gray employed a similar analogy to Dryden, saying ethereal race. But what I missed is that there's a quoted part from this Mr. Gray poem. So I'm going to read this now. Behold where Dryden's less presumptuous car, wide o'er the fields of glory bear, 2 coursers of ethereal race, with necks in thunderous clouth, and a long resounding pace. And that's from the Ode on the Progress of Poesy. So the assumption there is that Mr. Gray is ripping off Johnson in his analogy to Dryden, for what it's worth, which is not very much to me. Anyway, getting back to now, who wrote this poem? This other poem, was it Goldsmith? I don't know. Yep, Goldsmith's Traveller, and how much Johnson did on it or not. Johnson added, These are all of which I can be sure. They bear a small proportion to the whole, which consists of 438 verses. Goldsmith, in the couplet which he inserted, mentions Luke as a person well known, and superficial readers have passed it over quite smoothly, while those of more attention have been as much perplexed by Luke as by Lydiat, and the vanity of human wishes. The truth is that Goldsmith himself was in a mistake. In the Republica Hungarica, there is an account of a desperate rebellion in the year 1514, headed by two brothers of the name of Zek, George, and Luke. When it was quelled, George, not Luke, was punished by his head being encircled with a red-hot iron crown. Corona candeste fera coronator. The same severity of torture was exercised on the Earl of Athol, one of the murderers of King James I of Scotland. You getting all this? I just thought Luke was from the Bible Luke there. But it's a different Luke. And the wrong Luke. Or the wrong person. Zek is a name you don't hear much anymore. Zek. Z-E-C-K. George and Lukey here, but not Zek. At least around here. I guess Zeke. Maybe Zeke. No, Zeke is short for Ezekiel, though, isn't it? Anyway, I'm rambling now. Dr. Johnson, at the same time, favored me by marking the lines which he furnished to Goldsmith's deserted village, which are only the last four. So he was the closer, I guess. The trade's proud empire hastes to swift decay, as ocean sweeps the labored mole away. While self-dependent power can time defy, as rocks resist the billows and the sky. Talking of education, people have nowadays, said Johnson, got a strange opinion that everything should be taught by lectures. Now, I cannot see that lectures can do so much good as reading the books from which the lectures are taken. This is true, I agree. I know nothing that can be best taught by lectures except where experiments are to be shown. You may teach chemistry by lectures. You might teach making of shoes by lectures. At night I supped with him at the Mitre Tavern, that we might renew our social intimacy in the original place of meeting. But there is now a considerable difference in his way of living. Having had an illness, in which he was advised to leave off wine, he had from that period continued to abstain from it in Rigoli water or lemonade. I told him that a foreign friend, the later footnote tells us this is Baretti, of his, whom I had met when abroad, was so wretchedly perverted to infidelity that he treated the hopes of immortality with brutal levity, and said, "As man dies like a dog, let him lie like a dog." Eesh. Johnson said, "If he dies like a dog, let him lie like a dog." Oh, if he dies like a dog, let him lie like a dog. I added that this man said to me, "I hate mankind, for I think myself one of the best of them, and I know how bad I am." Johnson said, "Sir, he must be a very singular in his opinion, if he thinks himself one of the best of men, for none of his friends think him so." He said also, "No honest man could be a deist, for no man could be so after a fair examination of the proofs of Christianity." I named Hume. Johnson said, "No, sir, Hume owed to a clergyman in the bishopric of Durham that he had never read the New Testament with affection." I mentioned Hume's notion that all who are happy are equally happy. A little miss with a new gown at a dancing school ball, a general at the head of a victorious army, and an orator after having made an eloquent speech in a great assembly. Johnson said, "Sir, that all who are happy are equally happy is not true." So much for Tolstoy. A peasant and a philosopher may be equally satisfied, but not equally happy. Happiness consists in the multiplicity of agreeable consciousness. A peasant has not capacity for having equal happiness with a philosopher. I remember this very question very happily illustrated in an opposition to Hume by the Reverend Mr. Robert Brown at Utrecht. "A small drinking glass and a large one," said this man, "may be equally full, but the large one holds more than the small." Well, we'll leave it at that. Still at the Mitre Tavern, where I assume Boswell is drinking and Johnson is drinking water and lemonade. Till next time, bye from Boswell.